For 7 years, I drove my mother to every chemotherapy appointment. For 7 years, I managed her insurance claims, her prescription refills, her Medicare paperwork. For 7 years, I watched my brother post vacation photos from Sedona and Cabo, while I learned the names of every nurse on the oncology floor at St. Vincent's. When the attorney finally read my mother's will, everything, the house, the savings accounts, the investment portfolio she'd spent 30 years building, went to him. The room went completely still. Everyone looked at me, waiting for me to fall apart, to scream, to flip the table. Instead, I opened my tote bag, pulled out a sealed envelope, and set it quietly on the conference table. That's when my brother stopped smiling. My name is Vivian Hale, and I was 39 years old when I understood that the people who show up don't always get to show off. My mother's illness started the way a lot of things do. Quietly, almost politely. A persistent cough that she chalked up to allergies, then a scan, then a callback from her doctor that I happened to be present for because I had driven her to that appointment too. Stage 3 non-small cell lung cancer. She never smoked a day in her life, which felt like a cruel joke the universe hadn't bothered to explain. I was living 40 minutes away in a 2-bedroom apartment I shared with my cat and a half-finished ceramics hobby. My brother Callum was in Phoenix, 1,200 miles. He'd moved there 8 years earlier for a tech job that paid well and gave him the kind of lifestyle that looked good in Instagram grids. He had a girlfriend, then a fiancée, then a wife. He had a house with a pool and a kitchen island, and the kind of kitchen appliances that suggested someone lived there who actually cooked. He was busy. He was always perpetually, structurally busy. When we sat with Mom after the diagnosis, the three of us together on the floral sofa she'd had since the 90s, she held both our hands and said, "I'm going to be fine." She said it the way mothers do. Not because they believe it entirely, but because they need you to. Callum flew home for that week. He was present, attentive, helpful. He drove her to the second opinion. He made her soup. He fixed the screen door that had been broken for 2 years. When he left, he hugged her for a long time at the airport, and she cried a little, and I watched and thought, okay, he'll be back. He came back 4 times in 7 years. Once for Christmas, twice for short visits that lasted a weekend, and once because I called him directly and told him I didn't think she had much time left and he needed to come now. That last visit, he stayed for 5 days. 4 visits. 7 years. I'm not going to pretend the first year was hard in the way the later years were hard. The first year, you still have adrenaline. You have the fresh, terrible novelty of it, and there's a kind of grim momentum to managing a crisis that keeps you moving. I learned the difference between a port and a PC line. I learned what a neutrophil count meant and why it mattered before her next round of chemo. I learned to bring snacks that weren't too strongly scented, because the treatment center had patients who were nauseous, and I learned which nurses let me stay past visiting hours, and which ones enforced the rules. By year 3, the adrenaline was gone, and what replaced it was just life. This was just life now. Monday and Thursday were infusion days when the cancer came back after the first remission. Tuesday mornings were her physical therapy follow-ups after the fall she'd had in the bathroom. Weekends were grocery runs, medication management. The slow, steady work of helping someone maintain their dignity and their independence for as long as possible. I missed my cousin's wedding because Mom had a fever, and a fever during chemo meant the emergency room, no exceptions. I turned down a promotion that would have required relocation because I couldn't leave. I dated someone for 14 months who ultimately said very gently and not unkindly that he didn't feel like he could compete with my family situation. I didn't argue. He wasn't wrong. Callum called every Sunday. I'll give him that. He called every Sunday at 7, and he and Mom would talk for 45 minutes, and she would laugh and sound like herself. And after they hung up, she would sometimes say, "He sounds so happy out there." Like that settled something. I never told him how bad the bad weeks were. That wasn't a conscious decision I made. It was more that I didn't know how to explain it to someone who wasn't there. You can't describe the weight of it through a phone screen. You can't convey what it feels like to sit in a hospital parking garage at 11:30 at night. Engine off, just sitting there because you need 5 minutes before you drive home to feed the cat and answer emails and be a person again. Once, during year 4, I called him on a Tuesday instead of waiting for Sunday. Mom had had a hard reaction to a new medication, and I was scared and I wanted my brother. He picked up and I could hear noise in the background. A restaurant, maybe, or a bar. And he said, "Hey Viv, can I call you back in like an hour? We're at Marcus's birthday thing." I said sure. He called back 2 hours later and I had already handled it. I told him everything was fine, that I'd overreacted. He said, "You've got to stop scaring me like that," and laughed, and I laughed too. I don't know why I told him it was fine. I think by then, covering for the situation had become reflexive. I was so used to managing things that I'd started managing his feelings about things too. The cousins and aunts noticed. They visited when they could. Aunt Roberta drove down from Vermont twice a year and would spend a week helping, and I loved her fiercely for it. Family friends who lived nearby would drop off food, check in, offer to sit with Mom so I could have an afternoon. They saw who was there. They saw who wasn't. Nobody said it out loud, at least not directly to me, but there were looks exchanged at family dinners that I understood. Once, Mom's neighbor, a retired teacher named Mrs. Dunmore, who had been on the block for 30 years, stopped me while I was loading groceries from my car and said, "Your mother is so lucky to have you." I smiled and thanked her. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was, I know, but I wonder if she knows. Mom passed on a Thursday morning in October, 7 years after her diagnosis. She made it further than the oncologists initially projected, which she was quietly proud of. I was with her. I had been sleeping on the recliner in her room for 4 days by that point because I knew we were close. I was holding her hand. I had put on her favorite album, Low, in the background. A Carole King record she'd played constantly when we were kids. It was peaceful as those things can be. Callum arrived that evening, 6 hours after. He had taken the first available flight. He cried in the driveway before he even came inside. I held him, and I meant it. The funeral was the following Tuesday. People came from everywhere. Former colleagues, neighbors, women from her book club, the oncology nurses who had cared for her. The outpouring was real and it was generous and it helped. For a few days, we were just 2 people who had lost their mother, and the grief was the same size for both of us. 3 weeks later, we sat in the office of her estate attorney, a measured man named Mr. Aldridge who spoke in complete sentences and kept a box of tissues on his desk. It was a gray November afternoon. Callum was wearing a blazer. He had a leather portfolio. He was sitting up straight with the particular energy of someone who expects good news. Mr. Aldridge put on his reading glasses and opened the file. The house, Callum. Her 401A and the IRA she'd rolled over from her teaching pension, Callum. The joint savings account, Callum. A modest life insurance policy. Split evenly, which was the first time my name had appeared. Everything else, Callum. I sat very still. I kept my face neutral the way you do when you are in a professional setting and you have decided, somewhere in the previous 7 years, that you are not going to be the person who makes a scene. Across the table, my brother's expression shifted. Not quite a smile. He was too careful for that. But a settling. A relaxing of tension I hadn't noticed until it released. Mr. Aldridge set down the document. He looked at me in the way lawyers do when they are waiting for a reaction and have been trained not to prompt one. I reached into my tote bag. I removed a standard white envelope, sealed with nothing written on the front. I placed it on the conference table. "My mother gave me this," I said. "She asked me to bring it today." Callum's expression changed immediately. That settled look evaporated. "What is that?" She said it was for the attorney to open after the will was read. Mr. Aldridge looked at me, then at the envelope, then at Callum. He reached across the table and picked it up. The envelope was sealed with tape, not just the adhesive flap, and on the inside of the seal, visible when Mr. Aldridge carefully pried it open. My mother had written her initials in ink, the way she'd signed birthday cards my whole life. Her way of making something official. He unfolded 2 pages, handwritten, and read silently for a moment. Then he looked up at us both. "Your mother has requested that I read this aloud," he said. He cleared his throat. "If you're hearing this, then the will has been read, and Vivienne is sitting there, wondering what she did wrong. I need her to know. Nothing. She did nothing wrong. She did everything right." I felt something tighten in my chest. The will reflects a decision I made intentionally and with full awareness of what it might look like. It is not the whole picture. Callum, I love you. You are my son, and nothing in this letter changes that. But there are things that need to be said while I have a voice to say them, even if that voice is now just ink on paper. Callum was very still. For 7 years, your sister rearranged her life around mine. She was at every appointment. She learned my medications better than I knew them myself. She gave up things I will never be able to fully account for: time, relationships, opportunities, sleep, the small private freedoms that healthy people don't notice until they're gone. She did this without being asked and without complaint, and she never once made me feel like a burden, even on the days I know I was. The attorney paused, adjusted his glasses, and continued. "You called every Sunday, Callum, and I treasured those calls. I know you sent money when you could, and I know the distance was real. I am not writing this to punish you. I am writing this because I believe that love shows up, and I want you to understand what showing up actually looks like, so that you can carry that knowledge forward. I hope you will." My brother's leather portfolio was on the table in front of him. He wasn't looking at it. Now, the will is not the entirety of what I'm leaving behind. Mr. Aldridge reached into his folder and withdrew a second document. A letter from a separate firm I didn't recognize, on heavier paper stock with a seal at the top. 8 years ago, when the diagnosis came and I had a brief period of terrifying clarity, I made some financial arrangements outside of my primary estate. I worked with a trust and estate attorney separately from the one handling my general affairs. I did this deliberately and quietly. I didn't know any of this. Not a word of it. I established a revocable living trust, which became irrevocable upon my passing. The trust holds assets that were excluded from my probate estate entirely. Investment accounts. I consolidated specifically for this purpose proceeds from the sale of your grandfather's lake property and a small parcel of commercial real estate in Clarkfield County that I purchased 22 years ago, and never mentioned because I never wanted it to become a point of conflict. The trust also holds the proceeds from a whole life insurance policy your father and I took out in 1987 that I allowed to grow without touching. The combined value of the trust assets is not small. Callum was looking at me now. I didn't look back. The sole beneficiary of the trust is Vivienne Ann Hale. Someone, I think it was Aunt Roberta, who had come with us, made a small sound. I chose this structure for specific reasons. The estate in the will is straightforward property that anyone can receive. The trust requires a trustee who can manage assets across multiple categories over time. Real estate, investments, cash positions, while making thoughtful decisions about distributions and growth. I have watched your sister manage complexity under pressure for 7 years. I know what she is capable of. I trust her accordingly. That is not a word I use lightly. Mr. Aldridge turned to the last section of the letter. "Vivienne, I know you never asked for this. I know you would say you didn't do it for recognition, and I believe you. That is exactly why you have earned it. Please take care of yourself the way you took care of me. Please take the vacation you postponed. Please sleep in on a Saturday without your phone nearby. You have more than met every obligation you ever took on. You owe no one anything anymore. Go live." Callum, the house needs the gutters replaced before spring, and the furnace is original to the 1994 build and will need attention. The folder included with this letter has the maintenance records. Please take care of it or sell it. That is yours to decide. But please do not let things go unaddressed until they become emergencies. That has always been a tendency I hoped you'd outgrow. For the first time in the entire reading, I almost laughed. That was so thoroughly my mother. I love you both. I was proud of both of you in different ways and for different reasons. I hope you will use this as a beginning rather than an ending. Mom, Mr. Aldridge set the pages down. The room was quiet in the specific way that rooms get quiet when everyone is processing the same information from completely different directions. Callum was the first to speak. He didn't address me, not right away. He looked at the table for a long moment, at the letter lying there in my mother's handwriting, and then he said, very quietly, "She planned this for 8 years. Yes, Mr. Aldridge said. She never said anything. No. Another silence. Aunt Roberta reached over and put her hand over mine without saying anything. I let her. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I think it matters. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't the satisfaction of being proved right, or the relief of a debt being paid. What I felt, more than anything, was grief, sharper and more specific than anything I'd felt at the funeral. Because the letter made her real again in a way that the previous few weeks had started to soften. It was her voice, her rhythm, the specific way she moved between tenderness and practicality in the same paragraph, the way she'd always done. She had thought about all of this. She had thought about me, specifically and carefully, for 8 years, and I hadn't known. I had spent 7 years wondering, in the quiet parts of myself, whether she saw what it cost. The letter answered that. Callum and I didn't talk in the parking lot. He walked to his rental car, and I walked to mine, and we drove separately back to the house. That evening, he knocked on the bedroom door where I was sitting with my laptop, pretending to look at emails. He came in and sat on the edge of the bed and didn't say anything for a minute. Then he said, "I should have come more." I didn't argue. I didn't say it wasn't a big deal, which would have been a lie. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't entirely, not yet. I said, "I know." He nodded. "I'm sorry, Viv, I know that too," I said. We sat there for a while. Not reconciled, not closed, but open, which is where honesty starts. I have been asked by people who know the story whether I feel like I won. I understand why they ask it that way. The framing makes sense from the outside. There's a clear before and after, a reversal of expectations, a satisfying architecture to the whole thing. But that's not what it felt like from inside it. My mother didn't leave me a trust to reward me for enduring. She left it to me because she looked at her 2 children and made a clear-eyed assessment of who had demonstrated the capacity to be a steward of something that mattered. That's a different thing. It's a harder thing to sit with, actually, because it comes without the simple comfort of having been chosen. It comes with the weight of being known. I took the vacation. A full 2 weeks in June, the following summer. Somewhere I'd bookmarked years ago and kept moving to someday. I left my phone in the hotel, safe for entire afternoons. I slept until 8 without guilt. I watched the light change over water and thought about my mother, and about what it means to choose to be present for the people you love. Not because someone asks you to, and not because you expect to be compensated, but because when the time comes and they need someone to be there, you want to be able to say that you were. My brother Abel's. My brother replaced the furnace before Thanksgiving. He called to tell me. It was a long call. We're getting there. My mother used to say that the people who love you most aren't always the loudest ones in the room. I spent 7 years thinking she might not have noticed. I was wrong about that. She noticed everything. She just waited until the right moment to say so. I think about that a lot now. How much quiet attention looks like absence until it doesn't.